Long ago, in the hills of Bethlehem, there lived a shepherd boy named David. He wasn't the tallest or the strongest, but his heart was full of courage and love for God. He was a skilled musician and often played his lyre and sang songs to God as he watched over the sheep. David's heart belonged to the Lord, and he knew that God was always with him. David was the youngest son of Jesse, the son of Obed, and the grandson of Boaz and Ruth. When Israel came into conflict with the Philistines, a people from a neighboring region, his brothers went to fight for King Saul. Young David would travel back and forth to the king's camp to bring his brothers food and supplies. Even though David was the youngest and smallest, God saw something special in his heart, a heart full of courage and faith. God had rejected Saul as king over Israel due to disobedience and wanted him replaced. So, he sent prophet Samuel to Jesse, David's father's house. God told prophet Samuel that he had found for himself a king amongst Jesse's sons. Samuel obeyed the Lord and went to Bethlehem. Jesse brought 7 of his sons to Samuel, but the Lord did not choose them, and they had to wait until David was sent for and brought before the prophet. Then the Lord instructed Samuel to anoint David, for he had been chosen to be king over Israel instead of Saul. Although this later brought sarcastic and demeaning remarks from David's brothers, from that day on, David knew God had a great plan for him. Even so, he still had to shepherd his father's sheep at the time because Saul was still king. One day, the Philistines, enemies of the Israelites, marched into the land with a giant of a man named Goliath. He stood over 9 feet tall, wearing armor that seemed impenetrable, and carried a massive spear. For 40 days, Goliath taunted the Israelites, and King Saul, their leader, offered a reward to anyone brave enough to face the giant. But no one dared to take on Goliath. The Israelites were paralyzed with fear, and their faith in God's protection seemed to waver. David's brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, were among the Israelites fighting in the war. David visited them on the battlefield, bringing food and checking on their well-being. As he arrived, he heard Goliath's thunderous voice, and the Israelites' fear was palpable. When David saw how scared everyone was and heard Goliath making fun of God's people, he felt very sad and a little bit angry. He knew God was bigger than any giant. He was outraged that no one had the courage to stand up for God and defend his people. David asked the soldiers about the giant and the reward offered by King Saul to the one who dared. David's brothers scolded him, saying, "You're just a young shepherd boy. What do you know about fighting giants?" But David was undaunted. He told King Saul about his experiences as a shepherd, fighting off bears and lions that threatened his flock. "The Lord who saved me from those animals will save me from this giant," he said with confidence. Saul was intrigued by David's faith and bravery. He couldn't believe that such a small boy wanted to fight the giant. King Saul said to David, "You are just a boy. How can you fight a giant?" David confidently answered him, "When a lion or bear came to take my sheep, I struck it down. The Lord rescued me then. He will rescue me even now." King Saul then offered David his armor, a helmet, and a coat of mail, but David knew they wouldn't fit. He took off the armor, preferring to trust in God's protection rather than relying on human strength. David knew that God had always been with him, and he would be with him now. He didn't need a big armor, he had something much stronger: faith. Walking confidently into the battlefield with his shepherd's sling well tacked in, David stopped by a stream to pick up 5 smooth stones. As David approached Goliath, the giant sneered at him, saying, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" David replied, "You come to me with sword, spear, and shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Goliath was furious and threatened to feed David to the birds. But David remained calm and confident. He knew the Lord would guide his aim and give him the strength he needed. With a prayer saying, "Lord, help me," in his heart and a stone in his sling, David faced the giant. He trusted in God and hurled the stone. It soared through the air, hitting Goliath's forehead with precision. The giant fell to the ground. The Philistines were shocked and terrified. They had never seen anyone defeat their giant warrior before. They turned and ran. The Israelites, on the other hand, were overjoyed. They cheered and shouted, pursuing the Philistines and praising God for the victory. The story of David and Goliath is a reminder of the power of faith and trust in God. It wasn't his strength, but God's power working through a faithful heart, and Goliath, the mighty giant, fell. After the victory, King Saul was impressed by David's bravery and skill. He asked David to come to the palace and meet with him. David's brothers, who had been skeptical of his abilities earlier, were now proud of him. They introduced David to the king, and Saul asked David to stay with him. As David spent more time at the palace, he became fast friends with Jonathan, Saul's son. Jonathan was impressed by David's courage and faith, and the two of them formed a strong bond. David also became a favorite of the king's servants, who were amazed by his musical talents and his bravery. David became a hero, and his trust in God inspired many. David knew that no challenge was too big with God's help, and his faith continued to grow as he faced many more adventures in his life. David's story teaches us that with faith and kindness, we can overcome any challenge, and that God is always with us no matter what. Have a faith-filled day, won't you?